In recent times, a surge of speculative literature, magazine features, TV shows, a specially produced movie, 2 UFO museums, counterfeit records, and an alleged extraterrestrial autopsy video have surfaced, capitalizing on the media's intrigue with the Roswell event. Despite concerns about vested interests and the doubtful credibility of those contributing to the media frenzy, the tale has captured global interest. The U.S. Air Force is persistently charged with hiding a significant clandestine truth from the nation. In early 1994, Congressman Stephen Schiff of New Mexico asked the General Accounting Office to begin reviewing records. The aim was to uncover whether the U.S. Air Force or any other U.S. government entity held data regarding an alleged incident that occurred near Roswell, New Mexico, in July 1947. This incident purportedly involved the crash of an extraterrestrial craft and its alien occupants. Following the GAO's investigation, the Secretary of the Air Force mandated a thorough search for pertinent records. The report concluded that the predecessor to the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Army Air Forces, did recover material near Roswell in July 1947. What was recovered was not the remains of an extraterrestrial spacecraft and its alien crew, but debris from a then classified Army Air Forces research project codenamed Mogul. Initiated in 1946, Project Mogul served as a highly confidential undertaking geared towards acoustically identifying potential Soviet nuclear detonations and ballistic missile launches. Given its focus on constructing an early warning mechanism to thwart unforeseen assaults, the project garnered supreme importance, catering to one of the most critical national defense objectives in the aftermath of World War II. Radar-reflecting targets, nylon fibers, and assorted gear were hoisted by a series of weather balloons spanning more than 600 feet. Assertions suggesting the retrieval of a flying saucer by the U.S. Army Air Forces in the vicinity of Roswell in 1947 stemmed largely from a misinterpretation of the radar-reflecting targets. These targets were ordinary components of weather tools modified for deployment on the extensive Mogul balloon array. In 1947, there were no reports suggesting the presence of extraterrestrial bodies connected to the Roswell incident. The narrative surrounding the recovery of alien bodies emerged in the late 1970s and was further elaborated upon in the 1980s and 1990s. These later additions to the Roswell account heavily relied on hearsay gathered by UFO enthusiasts decades after the original event, sourced from second- and third-hand witnesses. These anecdotes, which discuss the discovery of bodies, also depict extensive operations conducted by U.S. military personnel utilizing a range of military equipment to retrieve fragments from a purported alien spacecraft crash site. Allegedly led by a furious red-headed captain, military staff reportedly coerced witnesses into silence, threatening them with severe repercussions if they divulged what they had seen. According to the popular retelling of the Roswell incident, the recovered bodies were supposedly transported under stringent security measures to the base hospital at Roswell Army Airfield for autopsy, where the same red-headed captain was believed to have intimidated civilians once again. Following the alleged autopsies, the alien bodies were said to have been transferred to Wright Field in Ohio, now known as Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, for additional examination and storage. After an extensive investigation, it was found that several claims accurately depicted activities carried out by the Air Force. Some reports mentioning bodies are likely misunderstandings by individuals unfamiliar with declassified and widely known Air Force scientific accomplishments from the 1950s. Conversely, it seems that certain descriptions of bodies exploit instances involving Air Force personnel who were either killed or injured during their service. The second report presents 5 key conclusions. Notably, thorough research indicates that genuine U.S. military operations, spanning vast differences in time, location, and objectives, have been misinterpreted or intentionally distorted. These misconceptions collectively gave rise to what is commonly referred to as the Roswell incident, Additionally, UFO advocates failed to establish precise dates of reported eyewitness testimonies, with inaccuracies sometimes spanning over a decade. Moreover, they inaccurately associated all these narrations with the legitimate retrieval of Project Mogul apparatus in 1947. Over time, these distortions distorted a set of confirmable Air Force undertakings into what a few have labeled as the extraterrestrial occurrence of the century. Reports surrounding extraterrestrials in the New Mexico desert factually pertain to anthropomorphic test dummies transported by Air Force high-altitude research balloons. Rigorous scrutiny of purported alien sightings consistently aligns with the attributes and deployment methods of these dummies. Between 1953 and 1959, the U.S. Air Force Aeromedical Laboratory employed anthropomorphic dummies in the High Dive and Excelsior projects. These initiatives centered on exploring techniques to safely recover a pilot or astronaut via parachute in scenarios necessitating ejection from extremely lofty altitudes. To conduct these experiments, test dummies were lifted up to 98,000 feet by high-altitude balloons. Upon release, the dummies underwent a period of free fall, allowing instruments to capture data on body motions and the efficacy of safety equipment. Numerous dummies landed beyond military territories and were frequently sighted by nearby civilians. Subsequent to a series of dummy assessments, Air Force test pilot Captain Joseph W. Kittinger, Jr., now a retired colonel, executed 3 high-altitude balloon bailouts. These aeromedical ventures, incorporating both dummies and human subjects like Kittinger, were unclassified and extensively covered by the media during that period. In 1956, 20th Century Fox released On the Threshold of Space, a full-length movie inspired by these ventures and shot at Holloman Air Force Base. Air Force staff, aircraft, high-altitude balloons, and the authentic anthropomorphic dummies were featured in the film production. The accounts from witnesses about military units swiftly arriving, post a supposed flying saucer crash, depicted factual descriptions of Air Force personnel engaging in high-altitude balloon and dummy retrieval activities. Since 1947, Air Force atmospheric research entities at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico have launched and retrieved around 2,500 high-altitude balloons, with many operations occurring in regions of New Mexico connected to the Roswell incident. The equipment, vehicles, and procedures employed by the Holloman Air Force Base Balloon Branch, responsible for most launches, precisely match the descriptions provided by observers who claim to witness the flying saucer and alien crew recovery. These large Air Force high-altitude balloons launched by the Holloman Balloon Branch carried a diverse array of innovative and, to many, peculiar devices. A significant portion of this equipment was experimental and embodied the cutting-edge space-age technologies of that era. The payloads varied from basic radio transmitters to advanced components for satellites and NASA's space probes. Surprisingly, qualifying tests for NASA's Voyager, Mars, and Viking space probes were conducted using Air Force high-altitude balloons in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Ironically, these balloons were launched from the prior Roswell Army Airfield, the location linked to the initial 1947 incident, and retrieved at the White Sands Missile Range, situated over 100 miles to the west. The use of cutting-edge equipment, experimental devices, and advanced technologies during that era might have appeared unfamiliar or unusual to witnesses, leading them to mistake these objects for something extraterrestrial or unidentified. Large Air Force high-altitude balloons carrying various payloads could have exhibited peculiar shapes, sizes, or behaviors when observed from a distance, potentially resembling unconventional flying objects commonly associated with UFO sightings. Recovering the balloon payloads was crucial for achieving the scientific goals of the high-altitude balloon program. The primary recovery zones for these balloons have been and remain strategically placed across Arizona, West Texas, and New Mexico, including the region near Roswell. To transport the equipment back from considerable distances away from Holloman Air Force Base, recovery teams utilized a diverse array of aircraft and vehicles. Coincidentally, the very vehicles reported by witnesses at the sites supposedly harboring crashed flying saucers. To streamline these processes, recovery crews employ optical and electronic tracking methods, along with aerial guidance, to direct ground vehicles to the designated impact sites. In some of the narratives related to Roswell, unverified claims suggested that military personnel recovering equipment in rural New Mexico areas intimidated and threatened civilians present. In contrast, members of the balloon branch maintained positive relationships with the local community and frequently sought their aid following a balloon or payload touchdown. Throughout their operations, recovery teams would either rent or borrow tractors, bulldozers, snowmobiles, or even pack mules from nearby residents. The presence of payloads, parachutes, balloons, and accompanying chase aircraft often attracted curious spectators from the surrounding areas. In fact, such landing sites would often draw large crowds of civilians, leading balloon branch members to liken the scenes to a circus arriving in town. Helium-filled balloon eventually deflated, plummeting to the ground like 1,000 pounds of cellophane, landing on the Gila Indian Reservation located southwest of Phoenix. Shortly afterward, we witnessed the descent of a sizable parachute, estimated to be around 100 feet in diameter. Attached beneath it was a silver box that experienced a somewhat forceful impact upon landing. Subsequently, it was revealed that this apparatus was the payload connected to the earlier balloon. Remarkably, with no identifiable markings, its purpose remained a mystery. Additionally, the launch of low-altitude tethered balloons potentially influenced a depiction reminiscent of an alien craft associated with the Roswell incident in popular lore. Notably, in a well-known book, the authors depict a drawn picture of a crashed spaceship reportedly provided by an anonymous source. Upon comparing this illustration to a photograph of an experimental tethered balloon test conducted at Holloman Air Force Base in March 1965, striking similarities emerge. The ginger-haired captain likely referred to Captain Joseph W. Kittinger, Jr. Captain Kittinger played pivotal roles as the project officer or pilot in the Air Force's three-manned high-altitude balloon initiatives, namely Man High, Excelsior, and Stargazer. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Captain Kittinger was a familiar presence at numerous balloon and dummy launch and retrieval locations across the southwestern United States. Despite claims made by UFO proponents, no verifiable evidence exists to support assertions of Kittinger confronting or intimidating civilians. Colonel Kittinger boasts an illustrious career as an Air Force test pilot, notably holding the world record for the highest parachute jump from nearly 20 miles above the ground. Subsequently, he completed 3 combat tours in Southeast Asia, achieving an aerial victory during combat operations over North Vietnam. After flying over 480 missions, Colonel Kittinger's aircraft was downed over North Vietnam, leading to his capture and 10-month internment as a prisoner of war at the notorious Hanoi Hilton until his repatriation in March 1973. Following his retirement from the Air Force, Colonel Kittinger etched his name in history by becoming the first person to solo cross the Atlantic through a balloon journey in 1984. The second Roswell report's unsettling concluding revelation revolves around the alleged manipulation of Air Force members who perished or sustained injuries in service to propagate claims of alien body sightings. Reports of bodies at the Roswell Army Airfield Hospital likely stemmed from a blend of various aircraft accidents, including a peculiar mishap involving a manned balloon. For instance, on June 26, 1956, a fatal incident took place where 11 Air Force personnel lost their lives due to a propeller malfunction aboard a KC-97 tanker plane shortly after departure. This tragedy unfolded about 9 miles south of the renamed Walker Air Force Base, previously Roswell Army Airfield. In 1948, the bodies of the deceased crew were recovered, identified, and processed at the Walker Air Force Base Hospital. The rumors of bodies at the base hospital were likely spawned by a solitary witness whose descriptions notably aligned with the circumstances and condition in which the victims were handled. Furthermore, assertions linking specific Air Force personnel to these alleged bodies lack substantiation, with some individuals not even being present at Roswell Army Airfield during July 1947. Regarding the balloon incident, a mishap occurred during a low-level training exercise for backup pilots involved in the Project Excalibur high-altitude manned balloon program on May 21, 1959, approximately 10 miles northwest of Walker Air Force Base. During the incident, one of the crew members, Captain Dan D. Foljam, later a retired colonel, sustained injuries upon landing. Subsequent to the accident, Captain Foldheim and the rest of the balloon crew were airlifted to the Walker Air Force Base Hospital via a chase helicopter that had trailed the training session for emergency purposes. Upon reaching the highly secured Strategic Air Command facility, the balloon crew members were greeted by armed Air Force security personnel who remained in their company until their identities were validated.